But I have to apply the facts to the law when I argue this into a jury. And so what are the elements of a second-degree murder? Because that's what we're looking at here. There's a death caused by the defendant, Officer Carlson, and the defendant had a state of mind, an intent to kill or an intent to do great bodily harm. And I have to say they're, shooting somebody in the back, and this was in the back. The two shots were in the shoulder blade. It was not in the back of the head. The two shots went through the shoulder. One of them went through actually the spinal cord, which was the fatal shot. But he shot him in the back, and so the elements there are for those three things are set, and it's the fourth one. And I'm sure everybody makes a comparison between this and the Loyola case, but that was the thing the trial of Loyola was about. It becomes this fourth thing, self-defense. The fourth thing, I have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the shooting was not justified or excused due to self-defense or defense of others. They're pretty much the same thing under the law, but when you look at this, we have to show first, at the time the defendant must have honestly and reasonably believed that he was in a danger of being killed or seriously wounded. Well, is that honest? Well, you look at that video, you listen to him saying there's a effing gun, and then afterwards saying, yeah, the gun was pointed right in my face. Is that an honest belief? I don't see how I can argue that that's not honest. That gets you 50% there, right? 50% there saying, holy cow, I just saw a gun and it was pointed in my face. So is it reasonable? Okay, is it reasonable then to react in the way he did based on having a gun pointed at him? And you go to the second part of the jury instruction. This is what would go to a jury. A person may not kill or seriously injure another person just to protect himself against what seems like a threat of only minor injury. Okay? Well, what evidence? What can you consider? Okay, jury, consider whether the person was armed with a dangerous weapon. He was. I would have to concede that. He is armed with a dangerous weapon. He's got a gun in his hand. We've seen the gun in his hand. The gun comes out of his hand. It's a loaded gun. And so, all right, great. So, is that reasonable to, try and shoot somebody in defense because somebody you don't know and has been struggling with you for, going on 2 or 3 minutes at this point in time, to fire at him to try and stop that? There is no necessity under Michigan law that a gun has to be pointed at someone to effectuate self-defense. It's reasonable under the totality of the circumstances. He's fought. He's never said anything. That's one of the more important things. He's never said, I surrender, I'm giving up, I'm dropping the gun, because I think that's a natural question, right? Okay, it's underneath him. How do they know if it's dropped or not? They didn't, it was hardly enough time to see that. But he never said, I'm surrendering. And once again, that may change things if he had said that, but he never did. So we have an individual who clearly accessed a weapon, pulled it out. What he was doing, I don't know. He may not have known. You'll see from my opinion, he was under the influence of cocaine. He had cocaine in his system. So he may have not been thinking clearly, but we don't know, but the officer clearly doesn't know, and so if he's got this person armed with a dangerous weapon, what is he supposed to do? What does he do? What are the options? What do I argue? Well, he should have laid on top of him. I don't think there's anybody here that would say that's a real good option. He's supposed to push off and maybe run for cover. That you're releasing him, and then so he's going to turn and potentially fire his weapon. There's not a whole lot of good options at this point in time. And once the law says we can't second guess. We can't say, well, he should have done this, he should have done that. He could have. Yeah, maybe he could have, but is it reasonable to fire at somebody who is pointing a gun in your face, as he said? And I don't know how we come down and argue that in fact it's not. And then partially, the last instruction there, you may all consider how the excitement of the moment. Okay, so it's not like it's all easy for us here to be here and make these arguments, but what was going through the officer's mind? He's been pointed, gun's been pointed at his face. How is he going to react? And I know there's comparison, once again, to the Loyola case. I think there was a basis to make those arguments because we're dealing with a taser that had been completely used up at that point in time, and there's a question. I think there's a legitimate question of whether it was a dangerous weapon or not, and obviously I couldn't convince a jury of that with a used taser, much less now we have an armed gun, and we're putting an officer in the situation that he's supposed to do what? And I don't think we can overcome the defense of self-defense based on these facts and what was going on at the time. Some of the things to address as well, I think it's fairly consistent. This decision is consistent with other decisions I've made. I brought some other ones. We went back to, back in, what's the other one? Sorry. We had one in 2018. There was a shooting at the security guard at the Le Petit Chateau on South Division. He thought a person was drawing down on him with a gun. Turned out he had a cell phone in his hand. I excused that individual. There was a homeowner in 2025 that had somebody on his back porch. They thought he had a gun. He was running away, thought he saw a gun, fired rounds. Fortunately, nobody was killed. I cleared that individual. Those are all, I've made these releases, so those are all out in your library somewhere, but I made releases like that. I think that once again, there's one last year that happened right after. It's on the Grand Rapids, Inside TV show. The Tin Can. We had a brother walking out in a parking lot across the street from a tin can. A man draw down on him, pointed a gun at him. The brother, standing behind him, the brother's actually the one that fired the first shots. I did not charge that brother for firing the first shots because his brother had a gun pointed at him. So this decision is consistent with just about any other decisions I've made. I think there is something when somebody's pointing a gun, you're messing with guns, and you point them at somebody, anybody, be it a police officer or civilian, it's extremely hard to overcome this self-defense. We've lost a few jury trials recently on murder cases, and self-defense is the issue. It's a very high burden. We have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt they did not act in self-defense. And I just don't see how we do that on the facts here. So that is the decision I made. I talked with the family. I made a phone call just before this press conference to let them know my decision. And that's all I have at this point in time.